In the dense Ozarks, veteran Arthur Corrigan wields a crowbar with grim determination, struggling to pry open a rusted metal door buried beneath the earth. Beside him, his loyal service dog Fenrir growls low, a warning of something dangerous lurking ahead. With a final screeching groan, the door gives way, revealing a suffocating darkness and a wave of foul air. The scent of decay fills the air as Art steps forward, his flashlight cutting through the blackness. What he finds inside is not a forgotten treasure, but a haunting truth that could shatter everything he's worked to leave behind. The eerie silence of the Ozarks wraps around Art as he steps into the suffocating blackness of the metal chamber, his breath shallow, his heart pounding. Fenrir, always by his side, remains rigid, ears pinned back as though sensing the weight of the secret sealed within. Art's flashlight flickers, illuminating the skeletal remains of two men, their uniforms faded and torn. A rusted shotgun lies abandoned, shells scattered on the cold steel floor, evidence of a violent struggle long forgotten by the world above. But as his light shifts, Art's eyes catch something unexpected. A small object, buried beneath the debris, hidden away for decades. The gleam of a Zippo lighter catches the beam, engraved with initials, DM. Art's stomach twists as realization sets in. This is no ordinary discovery. The darkness that envelops him isn't just the absence of light. It's the weight of a violent past, and its shadow is about to follow him out of the woods. With a glance at Fenrir, who meets his eyes with unwavering loyalty, Art knows this is just the beginning. The past never stays buried forever. The Ozarks had always been a place of solitude for Art Corrigan. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the perfect retreat for a man like him. Someone looking to escape the ghosts of a past that seemed to follow him no matter where he went. At 38, Art carried the weight of a decorated military career, one marked by high-stakes decisions, sleepless nights, and the kind of responsibility that left deep, invisible scars. The peace of the wilderness, though, had become his refuge, his sanctuary from the constant battle within himself. Art's frame, still lean and muscular from years of active duty, moved with deliberate grace, each step measured, purposeful. The short, sandy hair at his temples had begun to turn gray, a subtle reminder of the years spent in conflict. His hazel eyes, usually piercing and alert, held a certain distance now, a wariness born from long hours of reflection and a constant underlying tension. Despite his outer calm, Art carried a silent burden, the echoes of battles fought long ago still reverberating in his mind. Beside him, as always, was Fenrir. The German shepherd had been his partner, his protector, and his anchor. At 8 years old, Fenrir had aged gracefully, his silvery gray coat a stark contrast against the muted forest floor. His eyes, dark and intelligent, watched the world with a quiet intensity, always alert, always assessing. Their bond was forged in combat zones far from the Ozarks, a connection born of shared danger and mutual trust. Where Art sometimes struggled to ground himself, Fenrir always seemed rooted in the present, a steady force in an unpredictable world. The dog's presence was a silent comfort, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was something, or someone, unfailingly loyal at his side. The Ozarks in late autumn held a raw, untamed beauty. The hills were dressed in a patchwork of faded greens, fiery oranges, and deep crimsons, colors bleeding together and disappearing into the hazy horizon. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth, filling Art's lungs with clarity. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating tension that often filled his chest, the weight of his military experiences pressing in on him even now as he trudged deeper into the woods. This sprawling wilderness was more than just a retreat for Art. It was a way of life. He wasn't looking for a momentary escape, a brief reprieve from the world. No, Art sought something deeper, something lasting. He had come here far from the city lights and the noise of the world to reconnect with the raw, unspoiled nature around him. The woods were his constant companion, providing a kind of silence that he could never find within the confines of four walls. It was here, in the cool embrace of the forest, that Art began to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find peace. On this particular morning, Art and Fenrir set out early, the first rays of the sun painting long, slender shadows across the forest floor. Art carried a lightweight hunting pack, not for the purpose of hunting, but for the ritual of the trek itself. It was a habit, a way of grounding himself in the present. Fenrir, ever the tracker, trotted slightly ahead, his nose working tirelessly to sample the rich tapestry of woodland scents. They followed a familiar trail, a narrow deer path that wound deeper into a lesser-traveled section of the Mark Twain National Forest, heading towards a series of rocky bluffs Art had been eager to explore. But something was different today. Fenrir, normally steady and unfazed, stopped abruptly. The dog's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. It was the kind of sound that Art had come to recognize over the years, a signal of unease, not aggression, but definite alarm. Fenrir's nose twitched frantically, his body tense with purpose as his head darted from side to side, scanning the dense woods for any sign of danger. Art's hand instinctively went to the small fixed-blade knife on his belt, a reflex he couldn't quite shake, even after all these years. "What is it, boy?" Art murmured under his breath, his voice low and steady as he crouched slightly, sensing the shift in Fenrir's demeanor. The dog was never wrong about these things. Whatever he sensed, it was important. Fenrir didn't answer, of course. He never did. But Art trusted his instincts, the same way he had trusted them on countless missions in far-flung places. They moved forward cautiously, following the dog's lead as he trotted toward a narrow ravine that branched off the main trail. The ravine was normally dry, a trickle of water running through it after rain, but today the banks were deeply scoured, revealing layers of earth and rock usually hidden beneath a blanket of vegetation. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp soil and something else, something metallic and acrid buried deep within the earth. Fenrir plunged into the ravine with ease, his powerful legs moving effortlessly over the loose scree and exposed tree roots. He stopped at a section of the bank where the floodwaters had carved away a significant portion of the earth, revealing something massive and out of place. It was a section of metal, flat and dull gray, pitted with deep rust, but still remarkably thick. Art knelt beside it, his gloved hand running over the cold, rough surface. The metal didn't look like natural rock, nor did it resemble any forestry equipment Art had seen in these woods before. "This isn't just an old barrel, is it, boy?" Art muttered, his brow furrowing in concentration as he examined the object. The sheer thickness of the metal, the way it resisted his attempts to pry it open, spoke of something far more substantial, something engineered for strength and durability. It reminded him vaguely of armored vehicles he had encountered in his past life, though this was far too small to be one of those. As Art continued to scrape away the mud and rock clinging to the object, more of the metal was exposed, revealing seams and bolts that hinted at a much larger structure buried beneath the earth. This wasn't just a piece of scrap. It was part of something far more significant, a forgotten relic designed to protect and contain something, or someone. The weight of the discovery settled heavily in Art's chest, and despite the peaceful surroundings, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just uncovered something dangerous. The Ozarks, for all their beauty, had a way of hiding things, secrets, lost to time and earth, waiting to be rediscovered. And now, with Fenrir standing guard by his side, Art knew that what lay beneath the soil was no ordinary find. He had come here seeking peace, but peace was the last thing he would find. The first sign that something was off came when Art heard Fenrir's low, persistent growl. The sound, soft but unmistakable, had a different tone this time. Art looked down at the dog, who was standing still, his body tense, his eyes fixed on something just out of sight. The dog's instinct was never wrong, and Art knew this was no ordinary reaction. Art paused, lowering his pack to the ground. The wind in the Ozarks had begun to pick up, rustling the trees and carrying the scent of rain. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle as the woods around them seemed to shift, as if holding its breath. The unease that Fenrir was radiating was starting to seep into Art, his calm demeanor starting to crack under the weight of the moment. "What is it, boy?" Art whispered again, but the dog didn't answer. He never did. Fenrir's head turned slowly toward a thick cluster of underbrush on the far side of the ravine, his growl now almost imperceptible like the rumble of distant thunder. Art instinctively moved closer, his boots barely making a sound as he maneuvered through the foliage. The ravine ahead was still, the only movement coming from the occasional gust of wind. As he neared the brush, Art's eyes scanned the area, seeking any sign of movement, anything that could explain Fenrir's agitation. But there was nothing. The woods, as always, were silent, except for the strange metallic scent that still lingered in the air, the smell of rust, of decay, was stronger now, almost choking. It seemed to be coming from the overgrown ravine's deeper recesses, a place Art hadn't planned on venturing. But Fenrir was already moving, pulling ahead toward the dense undergrowth. His tail was low, and his eyes were focused with an intensity that Art recognized all too well. Without thinking, Art followed. They moved deeper into the ravine, the ground beneath their feet uneven and treacherous. The area had been scoured by the recent flash flood, and Art had to steady himself against exposed roots and loose rocks. Fenrir had no such trouble. He seemed to glide over the terrain, his powerful muscles propelling him forward, as if driven by an unseen force. As they descended, the air became heavier, the scent of earth and metal mixing in a nauseating blend. Fenrir stopped suddenly, his nose twitching. The dog turned back to Art, his growl growing louder, more urgent. Art froze. He could feel it then, the strange presence in the air, something beyond the usual stillness of the forest. Ahead of them, partially exposed by the recent erosion, was something massive, a dark form blending into the ravine's walls. Art's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. The object wasn't just a metal fragment. It was part of a large structure, half buried in the earth. It was rectangular, a massive slab of steel that had clearly been there for decades, if not longer. The sheer size of it made Art's heart race. "It's buried deep," Art muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible in the heavy silence. He stepped forward cautiously, his eyes locked on the object. It was rusted and pitted with age, but the metal was thick and strong, far too thick to be anything as simple as a discarded piece of equipment. No, this was something far more deliberate. Fenrir was already sniffing the ground around it, the dog's nose close to the earth, as though trying to determine the object's origins. Art squatted down, running a gloved hand over the surface of the metal. It was cold and rough, almost alien to the surroundings. The texture was smooth in some places and jagged in others, as though it had been purposely shaped to fit into the landscape. There were seams in the metal, where plates had been bolted together, and the more Art looked at it, the more it reminded him of something he'd seen before. "Not just a barrel," he muttered again, his brow furrowed as he inspected the strange object more closely. "This is something engineered, something designed." His fingers found a seam, a thin gap that ran the length of the object. Without hesitation, Art pulled out his multi-tool, deploying the small pick to scrape away the dirt and debris that clung to the edges. The metal was tough, but the pick made slow progress, clearing away years of soil and rock. As the metal began to emerge more fully, Art's eyes widened. The structure wasn't just a container. It was part of something much larger, something carefully concealed. "This wasn't just left here," Art whispered to himself. "It's been hidden, buried on purpose." The metallic scent in the air grew stronger, almost overpowering. Art's mind raced, trying to make sense of it. He had seen military vehicles and armored trucks in the past, and the construction of this structure, though much smaller, bore the hallmarks of something designed to protect, to contain. Art's stomach tightened as a chilling realization struck him. This wasn't an old piece of farm machinery, a forgotten relic of some bygone era. This was something far more dangerous. Fenrir's low growl interrupted his thoughts. Art turned to find the dog staring intently at a section of the object, his nose twitching and his body coiled in alertness. The dog was fixated on something deep within the shadowed recess of the metal. "What is it, Fenrir?" Art asked, his voice quiet but urgent. The dog's behavior was a clear signal. Whatever was buried here was something Art needed to take seriously. Art crouched down, his heart pounding as he reached for his crowbar. The metal was resistant, but Art's experience told him it was possible to break the seal. He knew the risks of uncovering something like this. Whatever was inside had been sealed away for decades, hidden by forces that Art couldn't begin to comprehend. But he was already too far in, and the mystery gnawed at him. He had to know what was hidden here. With a grunt, Art wedged the crowbar into the seam, leveraging his full weight to break the seal. The metal groaned in protest, a high-pitched screech that sent a shiver through him. He pushed harder, feeling the metal bend under the force. Suddenly, the door gave way with a sharp, splintering crack. The sound of rusted metal scraping against itself echoed through the ravine, loud in the otherwise still air. Art's pulse quickened as the gap widened and the faintest whisper of air, a stale, trapped breath, rushed out from the darkness within. Art took a step back, his breath catching as a foul odor hit him like a physical blow. The stench was unbearable. Decay, mildew, the stench of time itself trapped inside this long-forgotten space. It was as if the past had been waiting to spill out. Fenrir growled again, low and steady, his stance tense. The dog was more than just alert now. He was on edge, unsettled by what lay beyond the threshold. Art hesitated for only a moment before pushing forward, the weight of his flashlight heavy in his hand. With a deep breath, he stepped into the darkness, ready to uncover the secret that had been buried for so long. But as his light cut through the oppressive blackness, the sight before him was something he could never have imagined. Inside, it was a graveyard, and he had just unearthed the past's most terrible secret. The air inside the armored vehicle was thick with the smell of decay and rot, mingling with the lingering scent of old metal. Art's flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing a scene frozen in time. His heart pounded in his chest as his eyes swept across the eerie tableau. Two skeletal remains slumped in seats, the faint remnants of military uniforms clinging to their decomposed forms. Their bones were exposed, brittle, and cracked, their once white fabrics now reduced to tatters. The tattered remnants of a security company logo on one sleeve, faded beyond recognition, hinted at the profession they had once held. The inside of the vehicle was a disordered mess, evidence of a violent struggle that had unfolded decades ago. Art's eyes flicked over to a rusted shotgun lying on the floor, its barrel pointed awkwardly toward the back wall. Empty shell casings littered the metal floor, evidence of a desperate fight that had ended in tragedy. In the center of the compartment sat a mangled safe, its door ripped from its hinges. Art's stomach churned as the realization hit him. This was no ordinary armored vehicle. It wasn't just a forgotten relic. This was the aftermath of a robbery gone wrong. And somewhere inside this forsaken space, Art knew he'd find the answer to a question that had been haunting him since his discovery. Art stepped further into the vehicle, the crunch of bones beneath his boots a jarring sound that reverberated in the hollow space. He moved cautiously, his mind racing. Why had this vehicle been buried here? Why had the bodies been left to decay in the dark, hidden from the world? His eyes darted over the clutter, searching for any clue that might give him the answers he was looking for. That's when Fenrir, who had been standing still by the entrance, began to act strangely. The dog ignored the remains completely, his nose twitching as he circled the space, his body low to the ground. Fenrir's keen sense of smell had always been his greatest asset. But now, the dog's focus was fixed on an area beneath the driver's seat, his tail flicking nervously. Art felt a cold prickling of unease as the dog began to paw insistently at the floor. "What is it, boy?" Art muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The dog's actions were never random. Fenrir had found something, and Art knew it was important. Art dropped to his knees beside Fenrir, the flashlight beam cutting across the floor as he looked where the dog had indicated. At first, he saw nothing but grime and layers of rusted metal. But as his eyes adjusted, he noticed a small object wedged deep in the seam where the floor met the wall. It was partially buried, its silver surface tarnished with age. Art carefully pulled out his knife and, with a delicate motion, pried the object loose. It was a Zippo lighter, old, battered, but unmistakable. He wiped the grime off on his pants, revealing the faint engraving on its surface. DM. A wave of cold washed over Art. His pulse quickened as the realization dawned on him. The initials. David Miller. The victim from the old newspaper articles. The name he had come across in his research about the 1987 armored truck robbery. This was no accident. These men weren't just victims of a botched heist. They were part of something far larger, something deliberately concealed, and this lighter, this personal memento, was the key to unlocking it all. Fenrir's low growl snapped Art out of his thoughts. He looked up sharply. The dog was on alert, his gaze fixed on the entrance of the vehicle, his body stiff with tension. Art felt his instincts kick in, the same instincts that had kept him alive during his time in combat zones. Something was wrong. They weren't alone. Art's hand went to the flashlight, and he swept the beam across the compartment, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. The silence of the vehicle was suffocating, and it was in that silence that Art began to hear it, the faint sound of footsteps outside, muffled by the thickness of the earth above them. Someone was coming. Without a second thought, Art quickly pocketed the lighter, making sure it was safely hidden. He rose to his feet, his body moving with the precision of a man trained to react under pressure. Fenrir, always attuned to Art's movements, remained close at his side, his low growl a constant reminder that danger was near. The footsteps grew louder, and Art's heart rate spiked. He needed to get out, now. The ravine had been quiet, almost peaceful, but now it felt like a trap closing in around him. Whoever was out there knew something had been uncovered, and they weren't about to let it go. Art made his way toward the entrance, his mind already calculating his next move. The Ozarks had always been his sanctuary, but now it was turning into a battleground. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, felt like a threat. He had to get back to the surface, to cover, before whoever was out there found him. As he reached the entrance, Fenrir paused at the edge of the door, his eyes locked on Art. There was no fear in the dog's gaze, only a deep sense of loyalty and readiness. Art gave a quick nod. "Stay close, boy," he whispered, his voice low and steady. With a final glance back at the vehicle, Art stepped into the ravine, his body moving swiftly, the weight of the lighter in his pocket, a constant reminder of the danger they were now facing. Fenrir followed without hesitation, his powerful legs carrying him swiftly through the uneven terrain. As they moved toward the dense underbrush, Art's mind raced. The discovery of the armored vehicle, the remains of the two men, and the Zippo lighter, it all pointed to something far more complex than a simple robbery gone wrong. There was a story buried in these woods, a story that someone had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. But Art wasn't going to let that story stay buried. He had uncovered the first piece of the puzzle, and now there was no turning back. The dense foliage of the Ozarks offered some cover, but Art's senses were on high alert. Fenrir, his ever-present companion, stayed close by his side, moving with the stealth of a trained predator. The silence between them was heavy, filled only by the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees, but the tension in the air was palpable. Every step felt like it could be their last. As Art navigated the rugged terrain, he couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery he had uncovered was bigger than he had imagined. The lighter, engraved with the initials DM, had confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a forgotten piece of history, it was a link to something far darker. They reached the edge of the ravine where Art stopped to survey the surrounding area. The entrance to the armored vehicle was now hidden from view by the thick brush and trees that surrounded them. His mind raced, replaying the scene inside the vehicle. The bones, the rusted shotgun, the mangled safe. But it was the Zippo lighter, with its initials and its tarnished surface, that was eating at him. David Miller had been one of the victims. But who was the other man? And who was Daniel Murphy, the name that had kept resurfacing during his research? Art knew he had to piece it all together, but the clock was ticking. Whoever had buried that vehicle in the ravine wasn't going to let it stay hidden forever. As they trekked back toward his campsite, Art's mind drifted to the town of Harmony Creek. He hadn't been in the area long, but he had already noticed the town's strange atmosphere. People didn't talk about the past, and when he had mentioned the 1987 armored truck robbery at the Creekside Diner, the response had been chilling. Silence had descended over the diner, thick and uncomfortable, and it was clear that whatever had happened in the Ozarks all those years ago was a topic people avoided at all costs. Art hadn't been able to let it go. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the pieces weren't adding up. David Miller had been a victim of the heist, but why had Daniel Murphy's name popped up in the investigation? And why had Murphy, a deputy at the time, retired so suddenly right after the robbery? Art knew that his instincts were telling him something wasn't right in Harmony Creek. The fact that the local diner had shut down when he pressed for information about the case was proof enough that the town was hiding something. Back at the campsite, Art was careful to remain low. His truck was parked in its usual spot under the oak trees, but he knew it wouldn't take long for someone to figure out where he was. Fenrir, ever watchful, stood close by, his gaze fixed on the woods surrounding them. The dog's sharp senses were Art's first line of defense, but even with Fenrir's vigilance, Art couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of unease in his gut. He had to act quickly. The discovery of the armored vehicle and the bones inside had set something in motion, and now he was a part of something much bigger than he had anticipated. As Art prepared to dig deeper into his investigation, He heard the unmistakable hum of engines in the distance, the sound of vehicles, multiple vehicles, growing louder with each passing second. Art's pulse quickened. This was it. They had found him. His mind raced. The first instinct was to run, to retreat deeper into the woods, to find cover and wait it out. But Art knew better than to run. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but the training was ingrained in him. He would fight if necessary. He had to know who was behind this. Fenrir growled softly at his side, the low rumble sending a chill through Art's spine. The dog's instincts were spot on. Someone was coming, and they weren't here for a friendly chat. Art quickly moved to his truck and started it with a low, rumbling growl of the engine. His hands were steady as he grabbed his rifle from the back seat and checked the chamber. The gun was cold, but Art's grip was firm, his mind already calculating his next move. He had to stay calm. He had to think. The vehicles came closer, their tires crunching over the loose gravel of the logging road. Art could hear the hum of their engines as they approached the campsite, and then, with a flash of headlights, they came into view. Two black SUVs, identical in every way, pulling up short of the ravine, their headlights cutting through the trees. The vehicles stopped, and three figures emerged. Two men Art recognized immediately, the hulking driver from the chase, and the bearded man, Miller, who was still limping from Fenrir's attack. The third figure, however, was unfamiliar. He was older than the others, distinguished in appearance, with silver hair that gleamed under the headlights. He moved with authority, his presence commanding the attention of the men around him. Art's blood ran cold. This had to be Daniel Murphy, the man behind the robbery. The man whose name had been connected to everything from the missing armored vehicle to the dark secrets hidden within the Ozarks. Murphy barked orders at his men, gesturing toward the ravine. Art could hear the edge of urgency in his voice. He knew they were searching for him, but Art wasn't going to make it easy. He dropped back into the cover of the trees, Fenrir following closely behind. The dog's presence was a constant reassurance. His instincts, sharp as ever, would guide them through the woods. Art needed to stay hidden for now. The element of surprise would be his best weapon. He watched through the thick underbrush as the three men fanned out, rifles held at the ready, their movements precise and calculated. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to track. But Art knew this forest better than anyone. With a quick motion, Art signaled Fenrir to move, the dog slipping silently through the trees, his body low to the ground, eyes fixed on the figures below. Art followed at a distance, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, using the trees and underbrush for cover. He had to stay ahead of them. He had to make them think he was still inside the ravine. The trap was set, and Art was ready to let it close. Art moved through the trees with purpose, staying low and keeping an eye on the SUVs that had parked just outside the ravine. His heart pounded, but his mind was sharp, calculating every move with precision. Fenrir, as always, was by his side, moving with uncanny silence through the underbrush, a ghost in the wilderness. The dog's keen senses were a vital asset now, guiding Art through the dense Ozark foliage as they moved to set up a diversion. He knew his window of opportunity was small, and he couldn't afford any mistakes. The sound of the SUVs idling at the ravine's edge was deafening, but Art knew it wouldn't be long before they began to search for him. Murphy's voice, sharpened by authority and urgency, carried through the still air, his orders clear, his presence commanding. Art's stomach twisted with the familiar feeling of being hunted. It was a sensation Art had known all too well. The feeling of being pursued, of knowing that someone was coming for him, and that he had to outsmart them before they got too close. This time, however, the stakes were much higher. It wasn't just his life on the line. It was the truth, buried in the ravine, and everything that had led him to this point. Murphy's men were searching the edges of the ravine, fanning out, their rifles trained on the shadows. Art knew they were expecting him to make a run for it, anticipating his every move. But Art was one step ahead. He had spent years in the military, learning the ins and outs of combat. But more than that, he had learned to think like the enemy. He knew what they'd expect and how to use it against them. They wouldn't find him if they kept looking in the wrong places. Art and Fenrir skirted the edge of the ravine, slipping further into the dense woods. The underbrush was thick here, but it provided ample cover, and the towering trees created a canopy that obscured the moonlight. Art's eyes never stopped scanning, his senses heightened, attuned to the slightest movement. He could hear the men's voices now, louder, closer. Murphy was getting impatient, his tone edged with frustration. He had underestimated Art's ability to hide, to survive. And now that underestimation was coming back to haunt him. Fenrir, sensing his partner's focus, remained close, his low growl an occasional reminder that the threat was still out there. Art couldn't afford to be distracted. He had one objective now, to turn the tables on Murphy and force him into the open. He needed to make Murphy feel exposed, vulnerable, just like Art had felt when he first uncovered the hidden vehicle. Fenrir's growl deepened as the sound of footsteps approached. Art gestured for him to stay low and moved swiftly to the side, circling the men's position. His heart raced as he crawled over the uneven ground, positioning himself above the ravine, on higher ground where the foliage provided perfect cover. From here, he had a clear line of sight to the men below, who were now clustered near the base of the ravine, checking the area where Art had last been seen. Art took a deep breath. This was his moment. He moved silently, quickly setting a series of small traps with thin fishing wire tied to cans filled with pebbles. He'd learned the basics of survival tactics in the military, and while he didn't have military-grade equipment, he knew how to make do with what he had. The fishing line was strong enough to trip up his pursuers and create the noise he needed to buy himself some time. He placed them carefully, marking their locations in his mind with the precision of a seasoned operative. As the last can was set, Art gave Fenrir a silent command. The dog slipped back into the shadows, disappearing like a wraith into the night. The waiting game had begun. It wasn't long before the first of Murphy's men tripped one of the lines. The cans rattled as they swung from the wire, sending a loud clatter through the woods. Art's heart skipped a beat as he watched the men react. The driver, who had been trailing behind, cursed loudly. The bearded man, Miller, turned toward the noise, his rifle swinging around as he scanned the trees, his eyes squinting in the dim light. "That wasn't him," Miller muttered, though the fear in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Murphy barked an order. "Stay focused. He's here. He's got to be." Art was already moving again, slinking further along the high ground, making his way back toward the ravine. His next move was crucial. He needed to make them believe he had retreated into the deeper woods. Murphy would be expecting Art to run. He wouldn't expect him to stay put, to use the terrain to his advantage. The two men spread out further, covering more ground, their rifles now trained on the darkness between the trees. Art's pulse was steady. He moved like a shadow, silently creeping back toward the ravine's edge, using the topography to his advantage. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground, but Art was already past the point of fear. As he neared the bottom of the ravine again, he noticed the first sign that his trap had worked. Miller and the driver were arguing in the distance, their attention split between the noise they had heard and the feeling of being hunted themselves. It wasn't long before Murphy joined them, the three men huddling together in low voices. Art's opportunity was slipping away. He had to act. With a swift movement, he drew his rifle from its sling, checking the chamber to make sure it was loaded. The rifle wasn't a guarantee, it was his backup, the last line of defense if things went wrong. But right now, it was only a precaution. Art wasn't planning to fight. He was planning to escape. Just as Murphy and his men began to fan out once more, Art took a deep breath, checking the sky one last time to ensure there was no chance of daylight breaking the horizon. With the first light still hours away, he was in the perfect position to slip through their lines. His heart raced as he moved, using the cover of the trees to slip from one position to the next. Each movement was measured and deliberate. He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. Fenrir was already in position, crouched low against a thick bush, waiting for Art's signal. The dog's eyes never left Art, his body tense and ready to spring. The bond between them was more than just loyalty. It was a partnership honed by years of shared experience. Art knew Fenrir would be ready when the time came. Art exhaled and the game began again. He was no longer the prey. He was the hunter. The tension in the Ozarks grew palpable as the game of cat and mouse between Art and Murphy's men escalated. The woods, which had once been his sanctuary, now felt like a labyrinth, a place where every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, carried the weight of imminent danger. Art had turned the tables. He was no longer simply trying to avoid capture. Now, he was setting the stage for a confrontation. He stayed low, moving through the dense underbrush like a ghost, blending seamlessly into the shadows. Fenrir, ever the silent partner, kept pace just ahead of him, his body coiled with anticipation. The bond between man and dog was a force Art had come to rely on over the years, a partnership forged in the chaos of combat and solidified by the quiet stillness of the Ozarks. Art paused near the edge of the ravine, peering through the trees. The distant sound of footsteps on the forest floor was growing louder. Murphy and his men were moving in. They were closing the distance, and Art knew time was running out. His heart raced, not with fear, but with adrenaline. His mind was clear now, sharpened by the urgency of the situation. He couldn't let them get any closer. He looked down at Fenrir, who was crouched low, his eyes trained on the approaching figures. The dog's muscles were tense, ready to spring into action at any moment. Art gave him a quick nod. They had rehearsed this countless times. Fenrir knew what to do. The men below had begun to spread out, their rifles pointed in every direction as they methodically searched the area. They were professionals, no doubt, and Art had no illusions about their capabilities. But he had the advantage of terrain, and he was betting on their overconfidence. They thought they had him cornered. The first man to get too close was the hulking driver, his heavy boots making the ground tremble as he plowed through the underbrush, unaware of the trap Art had set. Art tensed, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. The man was within range now, just a few yards away. A soft rustling from behind him drew his attention, and the driver turned his head just as Fenrir erupted from the shadows. The dog was a blur of motion, his powerful body launching itself at the man, his teeth sinking into the man's rifle hand with lightning speed. The driver yelped in pain, the rifle slipping from his grasp as Fenrir held on with unrelenting force. The man stumbled back, trying to free himself, but the dog was unyielding. Art had a split second to act. With a quick, practiced motion, he sprang forward, crossing the distance between him and the driver in a heartbeat. The rifle, now abandoned by the man, lay a few feet away. Art grabbed it, his grip tight and steady as he took aim at the second figure. Miller, the bearded man still struggling to regain his bearings, had turned toward the chaos. His eyes widened in surprise as Art raised the rifle. "Freeze!" Art shouted, his voice cold and commanding. Miller froze in place, his eyes flicking from the rifle to Art's unwavering gaze. For a moment the world seemed to pause. Art's finger hovered over the trigger, his mind racing. He had them now. But Art knew that this wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about getting out of the Ozarks unscathed. This was about ending the cycle, about confronting the man who had buried the past for decades and made countless lives disappear for his own profit. Miller's face twisted in anger, but it was Murphy who broke the silence. The older man, now standing at the edge of the ravine, his pistol drawn, looked at Art with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You really think you can stop this?" Murphy sneered, his voice carrying an air of authority that had once been backed by the law. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Art's gaze locked onto Murphy's, unflinching. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're a murderer, a thief, and now you'll face the consequences." Murphy's hand shook as he tightened his grip on the pistol. His eyes darted toward his men, then back at Art. He was cornered, but he wasn't done yet. With a quick, desperate motion, Murphy fired into the air. A warning shot. The sound echoed through the woods, a sharp crack that sent a flock of birds scattering into the night. But Art didn't flinch. He didn't need to. His military training had taught him to remain calm under fire, to read the situation with a clarity that others lacked. Murphy wasn't going to shoot. He couldn't afford to. Art knew this. And that was the moment he made his move. In a flash, Art lunged forward, closing the distance between himself and Murphy. Fenrir, his teeth still bared, moved with Art, his body a blur of muscle and instinct. As Art tackled Murphy to the ground, the man's pistol flew from his hand, skittering across the rocky floor of the ravine. The two men grappled, but Art's military training gave him the upper hand. He slammed Murphy's head against the earth, the sound muffled by the thick layers of fallen leaves and dirt. For a brief moment, Art's vision blurred with a rush of anger, but the fog cleared quickly. He didn't need to kill the man. He just needed to end this, to make sure that Murphy's empire of lies and bloodshed crumbled to dust. "Fenrir, stay!" Art barked, his voice rough as he turned to look at the dog. The German shepherd obeyed instantly, sitting back and watching, his amber eyes locked on Art's every movement. Murphy struggled beneath Art, but the veteran's grip was like iron. "It's over, Murphy," Art growled, his voice cold and final. "You can't run anymore. The truth's out." Murphy's eyes flicked between Art and the approaching sounds of distant sirens, faint but unmistakable. The wail of law enforcement was growing louder. For the first time, Murphy's confident demeanor cracked. He knew this was the end. "No," Murphy whispered, his voice trembling now. "You don't understand what I had to do. It was just a job." His words were a desperate attempt at justification, but they fell flat. "You don't get to justify murder," Art said, his voice a razor-sharp whisper. "Not anymore." With one final, forceful motion, Art restrained Murphy, holding him firmly against the ground. The FBI agents would be here soon, and they would take over from here. But for now, Art had won. He had uncovered the truth. He had exposed the man who had buried it all for so long. The sound of heavy footsteps reached them, agents moving with precision through the woods. The lights of their vehicles cut through the night, illuminating the ravine. The chase was over. The sound of approaching sirens reached a deafening crescendo as the tactical teams arrived, swarming the ravine with disciplined precision. Flashlights cut through the darkness, bathing the trees and rocks in stark white light. The FBI agents moved quickly and methodically, securing the area and checking the perimeter. Art remained on his knees, holding Daniel Murphy firmly in place, the man's body trembling beneath his grip. Fenrir, standing guard a few feet away, surveyed the surroundings, his keen eyes scanning every movement. Agent Roberts, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, led the charge. His expression was calm, but there was a gleam of recognition in his eyes as he approached Art. His gaze shifted from the man on the ground, Murphy, handcuffed and struggling, his face contorted with defeat, to Art, who had secured the scene. "You're a hard man to track down, Corrigan," Roberts said, his voice tinged with a faint smile. He offered Art a firm handshake, a gesture of respect. "Good work. I'd say you've outdone us." Art nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was still reeling from the intense moments that had led them here. He had been the one to expose the truth, but it was the weight of that truth, and the cost of bringing it to light, that settled in his chest like a stone. For a brief moment he felt the tension in his muscles loosen, but it wasn't relief, at least not yet. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning of the end. As Roberts took command of the situation, ordering his men to secure the armored vehicle and begin processing the evidence, Art stood up, his legs stiff from hours of crouching and waiting. The full scope of what they had uncovered was starting to sink in. The skeletons inside the vehicle, the hidden money, the damning lighter, all of it pointed to one thing: Daniel Murphy's involvement in a decades-old heist that had gone horribly wrong. Murphy, who had once been a respected lawman in Harmony Creek, now lay in handcuffs, a broken man. His empire, built on stolen money and buried secrets, had crumbled in one swift move. The truth had come to light, and there was no escaping it now. As agents began to carefully examine the armored vehicle, Art's attention shifted back to Fenrir, who was standing at his side, his tail slightly wagging. The bond between them was palpable, unspoken but understood. Fenrir had been more than just a companion on this journey. He had been a constant source of strength, a loyal partner in the truest sense. Art reached down and placed a hand on the dog's powerful neck, the touch a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through together. "Well, boy," Art murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it. It's over." Fenrir licked Art's hand, a soft rumble in his chest that seemed to echo the sentiment. The dog was always there, steady and unyielding, no matter the odds. "School." Art's heart swelled with a sense of gratitude, knowing that he couldn't have made it this far without Fenrir by his side. As the forensic teams worked to document the scene, Art's mind wandered to the next phase of their journey. The past was never truly gone, not for someone like Art. He had spent years running from his memories, hoping that the quiet solitude of the Ozarks could offer him some semblance of peace. But peace wasn't something you found by running. It was something you had to confront. The truth had been buried for too long, and now it had come to the surface. Murphy was no longer a threat, but the questions lingered. What had driven a man like him to betray his own colleagues? To silence two men in cold blood and then bury the evidence for decades? Art knew that Murphy's story wasn't the only one that needed to be told. The victims, those forgotten souls inside the armored vehicle, deserved justice too, and that was what Art intended to give them. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, Art turned to Roberts. The agent had been busy coordinating with his team, but now he looked up, his expression serious. "Your testimony, along with the evidence we've collected, is more than enough to put Murphy away for a long time," Roberts said. "Not just for the original robbery and murders, but for the attempted murder of a federal witness. You've done your part, Art." Art nodded, but a part of him still felt unsettled. He hadn't just exposed Murphy. He had exposed a hole in the fabric of his own past, one that couldn't be repaired. The sense of betrayal, the weight of the lives lost, all of it would stay with him. But there was something else too. Something that had shifted inside him during the course of this investigation. "I'm not done yet," Art replied, his voice steady. "There's still more to uncover. More people involved. I'm not leaving until I know the full story. The truth needs to be told." Roberts regarded him for a moment, as if weighing the words. He nodded slowly. "I understand, and if you need anything, we'll back you up. We'll make sure this is handled the right way." Art appreciated the offer, but he knew he couldn't rely on anyone but himself. He had seen how far Murphy had reached, how deeply his influence had spread. The Ozarks weren't done with their secrets yet. As the agents continued to secure the area and gather evidence, Art took one last look at the ravine, at the hidden armored vehicle that had sparked this chain of events. The sun was rising now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The darkness was fading, but it wasn't gone yet. He turned to Fenrir, who was still at his side, steadfast and loyal. Art knew that their work wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the right path. "Let's go home, boy," Art said quietly. "We've got more work to do." Fenrir's ears perked up, and the dog trotted ahead, his tail wagging as they walked into the morning light, ready to face whatever came next. The last of the FBI agents had left by mid-morning, their vehicles disappearing down the winding logging road. The Ozarks, now bathed in the soft warmth of early daylight, seemed almost tranquil, but Art knew better. The forest, once a place of quiet refuge, had become a battleground. It was no longer just a sanctuary for him. It had become a place of reckoning, where the buried secrets of the past had clawed their way to the surface. Art stood on the edge of the ravine, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, his eyes fixed on the spot where the armored vehicle had once been buried. The landscape around him had returned to its calm, natural state, but the darkness that had lived within it for decades was now gone. In its place, a quiet sense of finality washed over Art. The truth had been exposed, the criminals held accountable, and the lives lost had been acknowledged. Yet, despite the justice that had been delivered, a part of Art's mind couldn't shake the weight of it all. There was no true victory in this. There was no moment of triumph or celebration. What he had uncovered, what he had fought to bring to light, was not a simple crime but the unraveling of a life that had been built on lies, betrayal, and violence. Murphy, the man who had once been a pillar of the local community, had proven to be nothing more than a monster, hidden behind a mask of respectability. Fenrir, as always, was at his side. The dog's steady presence a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always loyalty. Art reached down and stroked the dog's fur, feeling the familiar warmth and comfort in his companion's touch. Fenrir's gaze met his, calm and unwavering, as though the two of them had silently agreed that the past was now behind them. They had done their part. The truth was out. "I guess that's it, boy," Art said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. The forest was still, the only sounds now the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. "It's done." Fenrir licked his hand gently, his tail wagging ever so slightly. The dog seemed to understand the weight of the moment. Art had come to the Ozarks looking for peace, but what he had found instead was the raw truth of a long-buried crime. And in facing that truth, Art had done what he had always been too afraid to do. He had confronted the shadows of his own past. The journey had been long, and the cost had been high, but Art knew that this was what he needed. The peace he had sought wasn't in fleeing from his past. It was in standing firm, facing the darkness head-on and finding the strength to overcome it. The truth wasn't always easy to bear, but it had set him free in a way nothing else could. Art turned away from the ravine, his gaze lingering on the landscape before him. The Ozarks stretched out in every direction, an endless sea of trees and hills. It was beautiful, in its own way, and for the first time, Art felt a sense of closure. The burden that had weighed so heavily on him now lifted, even if only for a moment. "Let's go home, Fenrir," he whispered, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We've earned it." Fenrir, ever loyal, trotted ahead, his powerful frame moving with ease through the woods. Art followed, his steps lighter now, though he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer controlled him. Together they moved forward into the uncertain future, with the weight of the past finally behind them. The bond between them, forged through years of hardship and shared experience, was stronger than ever. And as the two of them disappeared into the trees, the sun rising higher in the sky, the Ozarks, once a place of solitude and escape, became a place of redemption. For the first time in a long while, Art felt at peace. And it wasn't the kind of peace that came from running away. It was the kind that came from facing the darkness, standing firm and finding strength in the loyalty of a good dog.